Now, programming from the Illinois Channel, an independent, nonpartisan corporation formed to provide nonpartisan coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois. For more information on the Illinois Channel, please visit our website at www.illinoischannel.org.
Just ahead, Governor Rauner discusses the recent bombings in New York City and New Jersey after a meeting with the International Association of Bomb Technicians and Investigators. At a following press conference, the governor discusses progress made in the state budget negotiations and the state's information technology services. Then at about 15 minutes from now, former Chicago Police Superintendent Garry McCarthy gives an address on what he sees as a growing culture of noncompliance toward the police that is endangering the lives of civilians as well as police officers. Following that, in about 1 hour and 5 minutes, former judge and former colonel in the Illinois National Guard Ronald Spears speaks at a dinner hosted by the Profession of Leadership Foundation, honoring their military and first responder colleagues. And finally, in about 1 hour and 35 minutes from now, we talk to Dave Treader of the Federation of Independent Illinois Colleges and Universities about how the state budget impasse is affecting public as well as private Illinois universities. That's all just ahead, after a brief word from one of our advisory council members.
Hi, I'm Dan Montgomery, President of the Illinois Federation of Teachers. More than 100,000 IFT members work each day in schools, universities, colleges, and state agencies across Illinois. They're professionals who teach our students, keep our public buildings safe and clean, and provide critical state services, and much more. As an advocate for our members, their professions, and those we serve, the IFT works in Springfield to support legislative policies that promote high-quality schools and public services. We also fight to protect collective bargaining rights for all our members and all working men and women. We do this through an organized program of advocacy and year-round monitoring of public policy proposals. And that's why the IFT is proud to support the work of the Illinois Channel, whose coverage connects us to legislative debates and committee hearings, as well as interviews with leaders on key issues like the state budget, tax policy, public pensions, and education funding. Funding education is one of the primary responsibilities of Illinois state government, so we should all pay attention to the policies being proposed and how they may help or harm our children's futures. You know, what's happening in the State House today directly impacts what happens in classrooms tomorrow, and what happens in classrooms impacts the future of our state and our nation for decades to come. I'm Dan Montgomery, President of the Illinois Federation of Teachers, and I'm proud to serve on the Illinois Channel's Education Advisory Board. The Illinois Channel, it keeps us all connected.
Next from Chicago, Governor Rauner discusses the recent bombings in New York City and New Jersey after a meeting with the International Association of Bomb Technicians and Investigators. At a following press conference, the governor discusses progress made in the state budget negotiations and the state's information technology services. This runs about 15 minutes.
Be here with you this morning. It's an honor for me to work for you. God bless you. My most important job is to work with you to keep the people of Illinois safe. Nothing more important. I want to say thank you to every one of you in this room. God bless you. You guys put your personal safety at risk. You put your lives on the line to keep the people of Illinois and the people of America safe. Thank you. We owe you an incredible debt of gratitude. Our police officers, firefighters, emergency medical personnel, all first responders. Thank you. This war on terror, this battle with evil people trying to do evil things, kill, hurt innocent people. It's been going on for decades, and it's going to go on for a long time. There are evil people working on American soil, trying to hurt innocent Americans. There are evil people working in almost every country, trying to hurt innocent families. to impose their will on free people around the world. You guys are first line of defense against their actions. Thank you for your dedication to sharing, working to improve your efforts, sharing ideas, networking, exchanging information, changing technologies, working together. It's the way we're eventually going to win this war. You guys are doing it. Thank you. These terrorists, they know no boundaries. Boundaries don't mean anything to them. They'll work everywhere, any place, anytime. And we've got to be ready. We just saw it again, tragically again, in New York and New Jersey just now. Saw it at the Boston Marathon. We've seen it in France and in Brussels and in London and in Spain and in Asia. These evil people, they're everywhere. We've got to stay vigilant. We've got to stay coordinated. We're very blessed in the state of Illinois. We've got an incredible police force, incredible first responders, and very sophisticated statewide terrorism and intelligence center working with you and for you. Thank you. Keep up the great work. Look forward to coordinating very closely with you. God bless you. Thank you. Obviously, we were looking forward to getting together with you this morning to mostly talk about state government transformation. The events over the weekend, tragedy in New York and New Jersey, just highlights the importance of this meeting here today. We're honored to have the International Association of Bomb Technicians and Investigators meeting here in Springfield for the first time in a long time. This organization's been in existence since 1973. These are police officers and first responders from around the Midwest, and it's an international association, and we've got, I think, one or two folks from outside the U.S. even here as well. This war on terrorism is never ending. It's been going on for decades. It is likely to continue for decades. And these terrorists know no boundaries. They have no respect for human life. And there are evil people here in America and around the world seeking to hurt and kill innocent people. We've got to stay vigilant. We have no indications of any imminent threats in the state of Illinois, but we are encouraging and reminding everybody to stay vigilant. If you see something suspicious, please contact law enforcement right away. And we are keeping our Illinois State Police and our statewide Terrorism and Intelligence Center active and in coordination with federal authorities, and as well as with local law enforcement officials as well. We just all need to stay vigilant and remind ourselves this battle with terrorists, it's every day. This does not end, it does not go away. We just got to stay vigilant. With that, I'll just touch on two other subjects, then we can do questions. First, we're very proud to announce that Illinois is one of only 3 states that is improved in their information technology services a full grade level by the center that evaluates technology use in state government. We went from a pretty lousy C level grade to a B level grade, a full grade point. Only 2 other states improved that much. We've got a long way to go, but we're making great strides to increase productivity, effectiveness, accountability, transparency in our state government. As you know, we brought in Hardik Bhatt as our information technology director. He created the Department of Information Innovation and Technology, and we consolidated those efforts. And already we've dramatically improved our capabilities with information technology and data. We've increased our cybersecurity levels. We've increased mobile applications. We've got now our Department of Professional Regulation is doing things more online and also with mobile phones. And we're leading a transformation in virtually every department. This is very important to increase the long-run value for taxpayers and provide higher level, higher quality government services. So we're very pleased with this announcement, and we're going to keep up the strong effort in our information technology work. Also, proud to say, it's a small step in the right direction. We've completely abolished the staff assistant position in IDOT. In one sense, you say that, well, that's, so what? It's just the staff assistant position was created for patronage purposes. Really had no real benefit to the people of Illinois, taxpayers or those who receive government services. We're glad to finally have removed all the remaining people who were illegally hired in the patronage scheme run by prior governor administrations. And we're just going to continue the work. We want to expand the work of the Executive Inspector General, continuing to look in every department for positions that should not be in existence and for existence of people who are hired not for the right reasons. They were hired for patronage or political reasons, not to provide high-quality government services. We've got to continue the work. These are just small steps we're announcing now. They're in the right direction, but we've got a lot of work to do to clean up government and make sure that our systems, our agencies are working for the people and taxpayers, not for political purposes.
Governor, at the end of the day, that staff position is just a title.
Right.
Do you have any idea how many of those people who were hired are still within state government who maybe moved on to other positions?
Well, patronage hiring has been going on in state government for decades. This is I'll tell you a quick story. When we first came in our administration, I wanted to bring in people who had expertise in Illinois government, but I wanted to bring in people from outside who had a fresh perspective. So we brought in some business people. We brought in leaders from other states and other state governments. The COO from Georgia, the Director of Children and Family Services from Florida, Head of Corrections from Iowa, Head of Legal for Mitch Daniels from Indiana. We brought in people from around the nation. Every one of them came to me within the first 2 weeks and said, "Wow, Governor, first of all, you didn't tell us it was this bad." And then secondly said, "We're stunned. This is not how government should be run. Illinois, these departments seem to be set up for political purposes, not for providing services to the people and to work for the taxpayers." Every one of them said that. In changing that culture and trying to root out the folks who are there for the wrong reasons, it's hard. Obviously, there are employment protections in place under existing contracts and labor rules, and we can't move very quickly. As you know, getting rid of the illegal IDOT hires took, how long has it been? Several years. Change is hard, but we've just got to stay vigilant on it. The reality is, job titles can come or go. The key is to look underneath. What is that person really doing? Is it necessary, and are they there for the right reasons? And it takes a lot of work to sort that out.
Where else are these jobs at? What other departments? What other departments are you looking at?
Virtually every department.
And you said the Inspector General there. Is he actively pursuing?
She's our Executive Inspector General. She's got limited resources right now. In fact, one of the things that we put into our budget was another $600,000 to expand her staff. Obviously, we haven't had a real budget, so that's been slower than we'd like, but we got to find the resources. We need to expand her work to really try to clean out the departments and identify the folks who are there for the wrong reasons and see what we can move them out.
What is the complication? Is this part of your dealings with AFSCME, or what's the complication in rooting these people out if they shouldn't be there?
Well, you have to go down below. You can't just look at the titles of people. You got to go underneath and look at what they're really doing and when they were brought in and for what purpose, and just make sure that they're actually there for productive work for the people and the taxpayers. A lot of times people were hired because they had worked on, for political purposes. And so sorting that out is not easy. You've got to go down deep and really investigate and interview and whatnot. And our hands are somewhat tied because of the labor contracts, but we'll work through that.
On the computer technology thing, do you know how much has been spent on new computers, or is that part of it, new hardware, or what's the situation?
Yeah, there is an amount of spending. It's some new hardware. It's a lot of new software. We announced 4 new apps that we rolled out in July, and we're rolling out a new app, mobile applications, different digital applications every month. So a lot of it's software development as well.
The State Board of Elections had a fairly high-profile breach of cybersecurity. You talked about upgrades. What is this Department of Innovation Technology doing to help the State Board of Elections make sure those databases?
Well, we've offered to help. They are not under our purview. They're not part of our government. They're not part of my administration, so we can't directly control that. I know Hardick and his staff have offered to give advice and assistance to their efforts as they've requested. Obviously, we want to do everything we can to safeguard the integrity of our voting system.
But budget has been an issue.
Technology. Can you respond to Ron Sandak last week saying that he was a victim of a large extortion scheme online?
I really can't comment on that. I don't know all the facts.
As the head of the Republican Party, are you yet able to say who you're going to vote for president? We hear you said you were voting for Trump at a crowd. You won't say. Why won't you say as the leader of the party?
I'm not going to comment on the presidential race. I'm very focused on Illinois. As you guys know, we need big reform in the state of Illinois. We need to grow more jobs, we need to protect our taxpayers, and we especially need to reform our political system through term limits and fair maps. That's where I'm focused.
I hate to bring up the day you work, but with every day that passes on, we're getting closer to the lawmakers coming back. I mean, are the budget talks ongoing, and can they expect something long-term when they do?
Well, we have not been in real negotiations with the leaders on the other side of the aisle, but I have been, and our administration staff has been in communication with rank and file lawmakers in both caucuses, discussing budget items, revenue items, reform items, and I remain cautiously optimistic that during the lame duck session we might be able to come to a grand compromise. We're certainly going to try to do that. This election really matters because there's a very clear choice for the people of Illinois. Whether you're a Democrat or Republican really doesn't matter. Are you going to support the status quo, or are you going to support reform? And we clearly need to go in a different direction. And folks who argue that our proposals on reforms are extreme or hurting some class or whatever, it's just not true. That's political spin. It's common sense. The vast majority of Democrats and Republicans support term limits. The vast majority of Democrats and Republicans support fair maps. Even our Attorney General, who is a strong Democrat, she has said that we need causation in our workers' comp system, and that's the #1 thing pushing our manufacturing jobs out of Illinois. Everybody wants us to get a handle on our property taxes, and the best way to do that is through local control combined with a property tax freeze. Nothing unusual or extreme about our proposals. We need them. And pension reform, we desperately need pension reform of all our pensions in a fair, constitutional way. And I've agreed to do what President Cullerton, leader of the other side of the aisle, has proposed. I'm willing to do that as a step in the right direction. These are common sense things, they're bipartisan things, and we need to do them. We have to stop the political spin and actually get reforms done.
So is the Madigan film your idea or Tillman's idea, or did you discuss it with him?
If not.
While you were interviewing candidates to replace Matt Murphy?
I've heard as much about this film or whatever it is. I don't even know what it is. I've heard about it as much as you have. I don't know anything about it.
You didn't talk to Tillman about it at all?
I heard about it when you did.
Governor, a judge in Connecticut just gave their legislature 6 months to overhaul the education funding system there. How confident are you that your commission can reach its February 1st deadline, and if not, does the state face a possible lawsuit like has been seen in Connecticut?
Well, I ran for governor in large part to dramatically improve public education in Illinois. We have been the worst state in America for state support for public K-12 schools for decades, and 4 times in the prior 10 years to me becoming governor, the legislature cut school funding. It's atrocious what we've done to our public schools. I will fight. I'm going to try to have them beat their deadline and not just wait till February. I'd like to get the report from this task force, this commission working on education funding reform, get it done before February, and I'd like to have that be part of our grand compromise, if we can, on a budget. I think that would be the right time to do that. We should have the best schools in America in every neighborhood, in every community, regardless of income level for families. Every child deserves a good education, and we've got to start doing that in Illinois.
Do you foresee a possible lawsuit if there's no agreement on education funding?
I don't know. I can't predict that. Well, I'm just going to fight every day to get more resources for schools. Our teachers and our students should be our first priority with our tax dollars, and they have not been our first priority with tax dollars. But we've also got to change the way we fund our schools. It's inequitable. We have the biggest gap between what low-income schools get and per student and what high-income schools get per student in public education. That's wrong. That's un-American. That denies the American dream to too many families. We're going to change it.
Yeah,
Thanks, everybody. Thank you.
Illinois said that's mostly false.
The Illinois Channel salutes our advisory council members.
Hello, I'm Michael Jacoby, Executive Director of the Illinois Association of School Business Officials. Most people never look at a school and think of it being an economic enterprise that spends tens of millions of dollars every year. They look at the school as a place their children attend for education, or perhaps as a place to attend a local sporting event. But handling the business of education is the job of the school business officials. We're the ones that keep track of the millions of dollars that come in and go out. Our members face a myriad of issues that include financing new buildings, paying teachers and staff, tracking our pension costs, and supervising the many businesses that contract with local schools. And that's why I'm so happy to serve on the Illinois Channel Advisory Council. The Illinois Channel connects us with legislators working on educational issues in the state capitol, as well as covering educational issues being discussed at conferences around the state. As we see in the debate over pensions, the many details involved in just that one issue, we need a news organization that's willing to give enough time to cover an important issue in depth. I'm Michael Jacoby, Executive Director of the Illinois Association of School Business Officials. I'm also proud to serve on the Illinois Channel's Advisory Council. The Illinois Channel, it keeps us connected to the issues that matter most.
Next from Chicago, former Chicago Police Superintendent Garry McCarthy gives an address on what he sees as a growing culture of noncompliance toward the police that is endangering the lives of civilians as well as police officers. This runs about 50 minutes.
Well, first of all, thank you everybody for standing during my favorite song. I didn't see anybody kneeling. I didn't see anybody with attention-seeking behavior because their NFL career is over. I didn't want to, I can't help myself, I make jokes. I didn't want to make jokes today because the topic that I'm going to speak about today is so serious. This is about as serious a topic that I have ever discussed publicly. And I've done lectures and I've spoken about emergency response to the World Trade Center, which, as you know, 15 years ago I was there with Rudy Giuliani, and that pales by comparison, in my book, to what I'm going to talk about today. I've done a lot of speaking, and I generally speak off the cuff. Today, I took the time that I put a lot of effort into this. Actually, for the last 7 weeks, I've been driving my wife crazy because I've been spending so much time at home paying attention to this. And I came up with the title, Legitimizing Noncompliance in America. I want to start by saying that it's my opinion that not one of these young African-American men that we've seen in videos, that we know the stories, Michael Brown, Eric Garner, Laquan McDonald, in my opinion, not one of them needed to die. Not one of them. With better training, better tactics, better policies, better supervision, particularly better tactics, each one of those incidents, in my mind, could have been avoided. And we need to do better, and we can do better through training, supervision, and better policies. But not all of these incidents are criminal. And what has happened? I think the world has been flipped upside down. I think that we're in a culture today that is investigating the police instead of investigating criminals. And I think that there's an action or there's a reaction for every action. And I think that at the end of the day, officers who behave criminally need to be held accountable. I was a captain in internal affairs in New York City, and some of my proudest moments, believe it or not, was arresting a police officer for robbery first degree. When you put a gun to somebody's head and you say, "Where's the money?" that's a robbery. That's a criminal. That's somebody who I'm proud to put in jail. And I did that. But if appropriate, they should be prosecuted. And if it's against policy, they need to be disciplined. We're paramilitary organizations in the police world, and officers need to be held to those standards. I'm getting that out front because what I want to talk today about what's happening, not just here in Chicago, but certainly across the country. And what's not being talked about is that almost without exception, and I say almost without exception because I don't know the details of every incident that's happened across the country that we see in the news all the time. Almost without exception, these incidents were precipitated by noncompliance, not just with the law, but also with the police. And one of the things that our friends in CPD will tell you that they heard me say over and over again is confrontation begets confrontation. And that's why training is so important, and that's why professionalism in policing is so important. But through a number of different venues, that noncompliance is becoming legitimized. It's becoming the standard on a daily basis across this country, and it's happening on a whole series of different levels. This is having, and will continue to have, dire consequences for this city and this country. The problem is being misdiagnosed. You're going to hear me use a lot of medical terms today. No, I'm not a doctor. I don't play one on TV either. I'm a cop. But we think in the same terms as doctors do. And the problem has been misdiagnosed, and instead of correcting a problem, it's my belief that it's being exacerbated. And the thing that jumps to my forefront all the time now is the Hippocratic Oath that doctors have to take. I know we have some doctors here, right? And I know the senior doctors, they don't do it everywhere now, have to take the Hippocratic Oath, which in essence, one of the quotes from it is, "First, do no harm." So if you're diagnosing a problem, the first thing that you're expected to do is, A, not make it worse. And that's not what's happening in this country. The solutions that we're using are causing more problems. It's happening across the country. There is a conversation about law enforcement that doesn't include law enforcement. I'm going to say that again. Everybody's talking about the police. The police are not involved in this conversation. I had the opportunity, I was on CNN about 2 months ago, and I was at a town hall with Don Lemon, and there were a number of people there from Black Lives Matter, and I made the offer. I said, if you want to sit down with the leaders of law enforcement in this country, I think I can make it happen. And there was tacit agreement. They all took my business cards. I haven't heard from one since then. I went back to my friends in law enforcement. The next day I started making phone calls, and in speaking to a number of them, they all said the same thing. They said, you know, we just came from a meeting with the President of the United States, with Black Lives Matter. And the President made that offer and it was refused. So the question is, where are we going? And I don't know the answer. But I could tell you where we're going is based on where we're coming from, and it's definitely in the wrong direction. Simply stated, the police are not the problem in this country. The criminals are. And I don't think anybody has the audacity to say that today, because politically speaking, you're either on the bus or under it. No. No, that is not a backhanded reference to anything that may or may not have happened to me. So where were we, right? Where were we here in the city of Chicago? And my comments really reflect a national picture, but I'm going to talk a lot about Chicago, obviously. Where were we? So in 4.5 years that I was the police superintendent, the men and women of the department achieved a 38% overall reduction in crime. We had back-to-back record-setting years, 2013 and 2014, of the lowest murder rate in this city since 1965. We did that by making about 20,000 less arrests during 2013 and 2014. And if you know about it, I apologize, but many people don't realize the issues with mass incarceration and the structure of our narcotics laws in this country, the war on narcotics that started way back in the Reagan years, and its effect on the African-American community. So by making less arrests, we got better results. And even by making less arrests, we got a 23% increase in gun arrests, right? Probably the most important thing we do, because illegal possession of a loaded firearm is the gateway crime to committing a murder. We had back-to-back years, 2013 and 2014, of 50% reductions in complaints by civilians against our officers. I'm going to say that again. Back-to-back years, 50% reductions. And the last thing that you do not hear is during the 4.5 years that I was police superintendent, there was a 68% reduction in police-related shootings. We shot 68% less people than when I got here in 2011. And how did we do that? We did that through policy, supervision, and training. As a matter of fact, because we achieved those things, we were involved, I don't know if you know this, but a couple of years ago, the president put together something called the President's 21st Century Task Force on Policing. And they put together a really serious group of intelligent and diverse individuals from different backgrounds who went around the country looking for best practices in policing. They compiled it all into a report, and they put the report out nationwide to policing. Well, we participated in it, and I was proud to participate in it. And when we received the report, I was astonished to see that 92% of their recommendations were already implemented in the Chicago Police Department. 92%. The other 8% we couldn't do because of contractual obligation or Illinois state law. How about that? So the best practices in the country, 92% we were able to achieve. Now, all of those things we did happened against the backdrop of history. And what hasn't changed is the lack of sufficient gun laws in the state of Illinois. I've spoken about it and spoken about it and spoken about it. So for purposes of this discussion, I'm going to put it aside. But those gun laws have not changed, and they do need to change. What I am going to talk about is history. I'm a big history buff. I study it, and it's really critical to policing, especially in this day and age. We have a well-deserved bad reputation in the African-American community in policing. I said it, well-deserved. And one of the things that I've done from the time I got here is acknowledge the history, right? Because recognition is the first step towards redemption. You have to first acknowledge how we got here. And I want you to think about this because most people don't. The fact is, from slavery to black codes to Jim Crow to segregation, segregation was legal in my lifetime. Legal segregation. Those racist laws, not policies, those were laws in the United States, were enforced by who? The white police officer. So at the end of the day, when people talk about reestablishing trust, I kind of chuckle. Because that narrative of distrust goes back 300 plus years. And if we're going to change that narrative, we have to first recognize it. It's not going to happen because of body cameras, guys. It's not going to happen. It's going to happen through different means. It's going to be a process. And we make it worse, right? You take that backdrop. It dawned on me years ago. Jay said my dad was a World War II Marine. He was not fond of the Japanese for obvious reasons because he got shot 3 times. All his friends got killed in places like Guadalcanal and Iwo Jima. And when he passed away, he still had that thing about the Japanese. And it dawned on me that that war ended in 1945, yet segregation was legal in my lifetime, in the early 60s, when it was legally abolished, right? That narrative is going to continue for generations. And it deserves to be, and it needs to be recognized. But for some reason, everybody's afraid to talk about race, and I don't understand it. Then what happens, we make it worse with high-profile incidents where we screw up. We make mistakes. The police make mistakes all the time. We see them. We see them frequently. The one that really stands out in my mind was the one in North Charleston, South Carolina, where after a car stop, a black man got out of a car and started running, and the officer just shot him in the back. I can't for the life of me imagine what was going through that officer's mind. But just like any other officer who uses deadly physical force, that individual has to account for it. And he needs to be held accountable. So you take all these bad incidents, you take this history of racism in the country, and you ball it all together, and I'm going to bring something back up that I've talked about before. Hey, look at that, it actually works. The concept of legal cynicism. Legal cynicism is a cultural orientation in which the law and its agents of enforcement are viewed as illegitimate, unresponsive, and ill-equipped to ensure public safety. All right? Everybody chew on that for a second, but I want you to focus on the last part, which is ill-equipped to ensure public safety. This is from research, right? And this goes to the entire criminal justice system. It's not just the police. It goes to prosecutors, it goes to judges, it goes to corrections authorities and sheriffs, it goes to parole and probation. The system's not working. People see the same people getting arrested all the time, and they come right back to the places where they came from, and nothing changes. And what I am going to propose to you all is that a lot of the anger and frustration in the disenfranchised communities, which is overrun by rampant narcotics and crime, the breakup of the family unit, poor health care, particularly including poor mental health care, right? Lead in the water, joblessness, hopelessness, lack of education and opportunity, is viewed as a result of a government system that has failed that community. Does that make sense? The government is not providing people the very basic needs that you have in a free society. And who is it that is the most forward and visible component of that failed government system? It's the police. Who goes into the homes? Who comes when you call 911 besides EMS and first responders like firemen? It's us. And what do? We break up families. We lock up parents in front of their children. This narrative becomes the prism by which everything that we do is viewed. So what I'm suggesting is this. What's happening in this country, the anger towards police, the frustration in the disenfranchised community, has a lot less to do with the police than it does a failed social and economic system that causes the anger and frustration to build up. That is generational. This is nothing new. This didn't just start happening in Chicago or Detroit or the Bronx. This has been going on for 300 plus years. The greatest danger to what's happening in this country today is the fact that we've misdiagnosed this issue. The medicines that we are applying are literally killing people through hamstrung policing and empowered criminals. And the legitimizing of that is about the fact that what's happening in this country is less about what the police aren't doing and more about what the criminals are doing. Nobody's willing to say that. The narratives just don't match. The greatest danger in my mind to American society today is the legitimizing of the noncompliance with the law. Compliance is a bedrock principle of the United States Constitution, based in the social contract. This goes back to John Locke and Rousseau. Sister Mary Joseph would be proud. I was listening, right, in civic class, right? The Constitution itself becomes invalid without compliance to the law. The social contract has it. Just to remind you all of what Sister Mary Joseph told me, is that you give up certain freedoms to live in a civilized society. And I'm boiling it down to very small words. But you can't pick up a gun and walk down the street and shoot people. And when the Constitution, when the law is not being complied with, what happens is it's going to erode, leading to the lawlessness that we're seeing. We're reaching a state of lawlessness, not just in Chicago. Look at what happened in Dallas. Look at what's happening in New York and New Jersey right now. Look at what happened in Baton Rouge. We're reaching a state of lawlessness in this country. And there's a lot of reasons and plenty of responsibility to go around. And when I first wrote this, I used the word blame, but I changed it to responsibility. To go around and what's forcing this changing dynamic. And I've already acknowledged that we need to do better as the police. Fact. Giving it to you. Period. No disputing it. But I'm going to go further. Community leaders here in Chicago, encouraging young people to not cooperate with the police. Going into the convention in Cleveland, I saw a man on TV, an alleged community leader, who was encouraging people to not be compliant with the police in Cleveland during the convention. And he also said that he was told and he was going to bring a gun. That's great leadership from community leaders. Look at what happened on Michigan Avenue. Peaceful protests? No way, folks. We have pictures and video of police officers being assaulted at protests all the time, and we can't get them prosecuted because of the politics of what's happening here. Punching officers in the face and being able to walk. That's empowering criminals. Elected officials. Elected officials are now establishing policy in police agencies across the country. Body cameras is a great example. I like body cameras, don't get me wrong. But body cameras are not going to be the panacea. People say, well, isn't it going to build trust? I don't think so. Releasing videos, making policies to release videos when there's a criminal or a civil action pending. I want you all to think about this for a second. If I was asked, and I was not, I would have recommended not releasing the Laquan McDonald video for no other reason than we don't release evidence in a criminal investigation. Have you ever seen it? We don't say this is what we've got when the case is still pending. We don't do that. And there's not an attorney that I've spoken to who probably wouldn't say this publicly, right? Because you're either on the bus or under it. There's not an attorney that I've spoken to who likes the idea of having evidence in a case that's being prosecuted or pending being released to the public right now. We're legislating good policing. Here in Illinois, we had the Community Relations Improvement Act, which came out of Springfield, 123. We've been fighting for gun laws for years. God forbid we stop people from dying. Let's focus on the less than half of 1% of the shootings in Chicago, which, by the way, do you know that? Police-related shootings in the city of Chicago are less than 1/2 of 1% of the shootings in Chicago. And this year, we've already got more than 3,000 people shot. Let's focus on that. Let's legislate a 2-page contact card. Now, contact cards, we're going to go into that in a moment. But contact cards, we can legislate 2 pages. So now when an officer stops somebody on the street, it's akin to doing a robbery investigation. Instead of just finding out who they are, whether or not they're wanted, and cutting them loose, whether or not they have or are about to commit a crime. We have elected officials campaigning on police violence. I actually heard a quote-unquote presidential candidate, whose name I'm not even going to mention to give her that opportunity, campaigning on police violence. This is empowering criminals. All of this, by the way, is being done in the name of what the community wants, quote unquote, right? Well, in the Laquan McDonald case, I could tell you, if you listen to what you hear across the country, communities want civilian oversight of police departments. Well, here in Chicago, we have that. It's called the police board. I was not the final determiner of discipline in the Chicago Police Department, even though I was accountable for everybody's behavior. Communities around this country want outside investigations into police uses of force. Well, here in Chicago, we have it. We had IPRA. Apparently now we have a new group. I haven't really read up on that. I'm actually trying to go cold turkey on this whole cop thing. It's not working. Communities across this country want federal investigations into police uses of force, which, in the Laquan McDonald case, we have. IPRA went right to the FBI. The FBI went to the U.S. Attorney, who impaneled the grand jury, God knows how long ago, but it still hasn't come out with its findings. Anybody recognize or notice that or forget about it? So that's what the community wants, and what were the results? Not what everybody wanted to see, was it? Certainly not what I wanted to see. So just because people want it doesn't mean it's a good idea. Releasing videos is not going to build trust. And by the way, if the video comes out today, or if the video comes out 2 years from now and the case is over, does it make much of a difference? But if you're compromising a criminal investigation, I think it makes a really, really, really big difference. This is empowering criminals. My friends from the media, not going to let you all off the hook. I'm sure everybody in this room heard yesterday that there's I believe it's a Gallup poll, that just said that trust in the media is at an all-time low, 32%. 32%. But the media is talking about trust in the police. Get that one. I think that that's the result of an obsession for creating the news rather than reporting the news. And it's natural that it happens because they're competing for ratings. These are businesses who have to make money. But I'm sorry, it's not TMZ. You could still do journalism at the same time. And I actually watched one of the national networks yesterday, and they had 4 talking heads on, all defending their positions about why they do what they do. Kind of sounds familiar. But, 2 weeks ago, there was an officer killed in New Mexico. And the tagline, the banner across the bottom of the TV, because I get up every morning and turn on the news, said that there was a police officer killed in New Mexico in a shootout with a suspect, but it's unclear who fired first. Did you hear that? It's unclear who fired first, as if the officer might have tried to murder this individual, and to defend himself, he killed the officer. That's the way that was reported. It's the most disgusting thing that I've seen on TV in a long time. And how many times have you heard another police shooting caught on video? All these shootings are not bad. When I hear this, I naturally have to watch it. And the most recent example was the video of the guy shooting out of the car at the police officers here, with the bullets ricocheting off the windshield. And guess what? The Chicago PD did not kill that man. But that video you don't see played over and over and over again, do you? This empowers criminals, ladies and gentlemen. The last category that I want to kind of put on blast, and I didn't know how to wrap this up, is the government. And this is a big one to me. And I'm going to talk about the Department of Justice. The Department of Justice now wants us to construct our crime strategies based upon population demographics. They want us to make our stop data. By the way, I know what you're thinking. Good idea, Gary. Go after the Department of Justice, right? Well, what are they going to do? Get me for having top secret information on my server? I had to. But the Department of Justice now wants us to construct our crime strategies based upon population demographics. And what am I talking about? They've now opened 22 investigations, and they will tell you they're very proud to open those investigations in the last 8 years into civil rights violations by police departments across this country. Now, I don't mean to sound critical of that, but what I am going to question is whether every one of them is an investigation into a civil rights pattern, or is it an investigation into something else? And my biggest issue is, what are the standards that they're using to investigate these police departments? And I'm going to talk about something called Terry stops, which most of you may be not familiar with, but it's the quote-unquote, and I hate these words, stop and frisk issue. Now, a couple of years ago, when this issue exploded in New York, and I was police superintendent here, my press guy actually came to me and he said, "You realize, of course, this is going to come back to you." And I said, "Of course, everything's my fault." And this was 2 years ago. He says, "Well, what are we going to do?" I said, "We're going to tell the truth." He says, "What are you talking about?" I said, "We don't stop people based on population demographics." Terry versus Ohio in 1968, the Supreme Court of the United States said that the police can stop people based upon articulable, reasonable suspicion. Now, what creates articulable reasonable suspicion? It's going to be training, experience, observation, and call me crazy, but I say crime data. Where is crime happening? Who's committing it, and when are they committing those crimes? You know, the city of Chicago Police Department seizes more guns than any city in the country every year. 3 to 1 in comparison to Los Angeles, 7 to 1 in comparison to New York. Those people don't come up to the police and say, I have a gun, please arrest me. As a matter of fact, one thing that I found, because I was out there with the troops, one of my favorite things to do in life, was the fact, and I was struck, it was odd to me, that when you encounter somebody with a gun in New York and New Jersey, where I worked, they drop the gun and run. But what I realized here is that they keep the gun. In one case, last year, 2 officers on-viewed a man shooting at somebody on the street. They got into a foot pursuit. They got into a vehicle pursuit with this guy. He ran on foot, hopped into a car. They got into a second foot pursuit. And they caught this guy literally hiding in one of those big trash bins. And you know where the gun was after that length of time? It was in his waistband. And I realized that the reason why they don't drop the gun is because the sanction from the gang is greater than the sanction from the criminal justice system here in Chicago. And the question becomes, why wouldn't you carry a gun? Well, folks, that's why we take more guns off the street than any place else in the country. But here's what I want to get to, and this is important. Articulable, reasonable suspicion. When we took a look, and we did this right away, we did a 2-year analysis of crime here in Chicago. Now I'm going to need my glasses for this part. So forgive me. But if you take a look, now this isn't going to work. So at this bottom chart, this is all districts. This is a 2-year comparison or analysis of crime. And what we found is right here, if you take a look, race, right, African American, Latino, other, white, district demographics, so this is the entirety of the city. 32% of the city is African American, 29% Latino, 32% white, right? Contacts. We're stopping, 71% of our stops were African American. Well, that sounds like a problem, doesn't it? Because only 32% of the population is African American. But when we looked at crime data, you get robbed right now outside Maggiano's. You call the police and you say, I just got robbed. What do we say? Who robbed you? Crime reports from civilian victims of crime said that, where are we? Suspect, 72%, 73% of our crime offenders in the city of Chicago reported by crime victims were African American. And that's why we're stopping 71% African Americans. Not because the population demographic is 32%, but because the crime demographic says otherwise. Now, take this and look at it in different places across the city. This is one that I really enjoy. 19th District, Lincoln Park, Halsted Avenue corridor, good neighborhood, right? Wrigley. The demographic of African Americans is only 7%. Yet, we're stopping 48% African Americans. What does the crime data say? It says 53% of the crime committed there is committed by African Americans. I want you to picture being an officer working in the 7th District. 7th District is Englewood. It's the most violent district in the city. It is 97% African American. According to the Department of Justice, in the 7th District, we're supposed to be stopping 31% white folks. That one guy is going to get stopped a lot. So that's who we're stopping. Now the question becomes, where are we stopping? This is just a chart that reflects that same data. This is the citywide numbers. Okay, not so interesting. I already gave you the punchline here. But this is the where we're stopping them, okay? So here's the deal. If you look, this is public violence, this chart right here. District by district in the city. The 20th district, the 1st district, the 16th district are the lowest on this side. The highest are the 6th, the 11th, and the 7th district. This is a 2-year analysis, 2013, 2014. Okay? These are our stops, right? 20th district, the fewest stops in the city, pretty close, right? With the 11th district, the 7th district, looks like a pretty good graph to me. And when you put them together, looks like we're doing the stops in the right places. Next chart. When are we stopping people? So the blue line are contact cards. This is our stops. And the red line is public violence. Matches up pretty well if you ask me. Crime reduction is about who you stop, where you stop, and when you stop. And the fact is, I always thought that Department of Justice enforced the law and the Supreme Court interpreted and made the law. If we got sued and went to court and said that we were stopping people based upon population demographics, I believe that the Supreme Court would say it's unconstitutional. But that's the standard that's being used across the country right now. Very confusing for the police, very difficult to get your job done. In my book, this is empowering criminals. Last thing is the Inspector General recently came out with a report regarding the Laquan McDonald case, where a number of officers allegedly may have made false statements. I already talked about the fact that you don't proceed with an administrative hearing when there's a criminal case pending. The 10 individuals who the Inspector General just found or determined through their investigation that they had not told the truth are 10 witnesses to first-degree murder charge against a police officer. And they've now been impeached and cannot testify if they were going to tell the truth or were going to lie. This is compromising the possibility of getting a conviction. And then what's going to happen? There's going to be a lot of anger. Long-standing policies are out the window, and mixed messages are being sent. Why would you stop anyone if you were a police officer today in Chicago? Why would you stop anyone when the Department of Justice is here investigating the patterns and practices of what we do and looking for civil rights violations? Why would you stop anyone when very confusing data, very confusing policies are being pushed? Supreme Court says this, DOJ says that. What do I do? What do I do? All of this together is empowering criminals. All of this together is creating an ineffective police and a more emboldened criminal. Criminals are being given free rein, and we investigate the police, not criminals. I want to reference a recent case in Chicago where I changed the policy about shooting into vehicles a couple of years ago. I said that you cannot shoot into a vehicle unless deadly physical force other than the vehicle is being used against you. Kind of makes sense to me. Because if you actually hit and kill the person who's driving that car, now you've got a 2,000-pound bullet going down the street, don't you? So it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to me. We changed that policy. That's one of the reasons why there's such a substantial drop in police-related shootings in Chicago. My information came from the media. I have no inside information regarding this case. But watching the video, it looks to me like the officers fired outside of policy. It looks to me like they shouldn't have fired into the car based on policy. It's probably a legal shooting based upon life-extenuating circumstances, but it's against policy. That's all you've heard about this. You know what I'm waiting for? I'm waiting for somebody to say, I've got an idea. Don't steal a car. Don't take the police on a high-speed chase. And definitely don't crash your vehicle into a police car at 50 miles an hour, causing a violent confrontation, and then be upset about the results. It doesn't mean it's okay, and it's not okay. But the fact is, that conversation needs to be had because this is empowering criminals. This is reaching a state of lawlessness in this country. Where are we now? In the city of Chicago, every crime category that we track is up, and I believe it's about 20%. Murders are up about 50%. If we reach the number, and some people are saying that they think we're going to reach 700 murders in this city, I want to put this in context for you. The worst year that New York ever had was 1990. There were 2,245 people murdered in 1990 at the height of the crack epidemic in New York City. Chicago is about 1/3 the size of New York. So if we reach 700 murders in this city, it puts us in the ballpark for the worst year that New York ever had 26 years ago. Talk about unacceptable. Shootings are up about 50%, and stops by the police are down 95%. Do you think any of this is by accident? We're creating a culture here that, like I said, is legitimizing noncompliance in America. Well, what did we think was going to happen with all these things that I kind of pointed out that are going on? Every action has a reaction, and our actions are backfiring. You can't legislate good policing or community relations. There are no political solutions for practical problems. And if you misdiagnose the issue, we're addressing a smaller symptom of a much larger problem and not even acknowledging that larger problem. People are literally dying while we continue an ongoing commitment to a failed endeavor. Remember legal cynicism? Remember what I said? Ill-equipped to ensure public safety. So all these steps that we're taking in policing across this country and here in Chicago, is that ensuring the public safety, or am I missing something? Has it been this bad in Chicago since the 90s? I don't think so. So not only are we not equipped to ensure the public safety, but our policies are actually promoting violence and crime. We're taking the wrong medicine for what ails us. We're treating a small symptom of a big problem. If we continue down this path, we're going to have this conversation in 5 years, and we're going to wonder why it hasn't changed. Crime reduction and cultural change are processes that don't happen overnight. They're processes. But after all, this is Chicago, where we don't want nobody sent. Well, if you think what we're doing is working, then by all means continue, folks.
Garry, what was it like standing next to New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani when the first plane hit?
Well, actually, I was standing next to him when the second plane hit. I missed the first one. You know, there was shock. Shock is probably the best thing. But one of the things that we knew that was happening, you know, when I talk about crisis management, you have to have a plan, you have to train the plan to your individuals, and you have to practice that plan. And even though we had no communication, when the North Tower came down, we lost our communications. Even though there was mayhem, one of the things that was really satisfying was I actually took my Nextel, which I had never used at that point, and went out to the scene and was reporting back to police headquarters what was going on. And everywhere I went, there were mobilization points, and officers were coming in from all over the city, being put on rosters so we knew who was there, given assignments, and going out and doing those things. We had trained our plan, and we knew that we were giving it the best response that we possibly could. It was crazy, certainly crazy, and quite frankly, the worst part of 9/11 was not what happened that day. It was the aftermath, recovering bodies, finding out who died, going to funerals, dealing with families. I thought you left, Pastor.
No, I did not. You didn't scare me away. Can you clap your hands for Garry McCarthy one more time, everybody? So, I didn't volunteer, but when you're voluntold to do something, I assume this is supposed to be proof that community police relations is getting better. So let me just start off, since they asked me to do this. Let me say thank you for your courage to address the horrific history of African Americans in America. And also thanks for acknowledging that a lack of investment in urban communities play a major role in this problem. You said the police are not the problem, criminals are. I submit crooked and racist cops are certainly part of the problem, just like criminals in urban communities are. I'd love to poke some holes in that data that you presented. We can have some fun with that over coffee. It should also be.
It's time to go.
I know, right? See, it should be noted that no organization represents the entire black community, and more than 80% of the protesters were actually peaceful, because I was out there. But here's my question: based on data, when whites are non-compliant, do they die or are treated the same way as blacks and Latinos?
Well, actually, it's a great question, and I know it's true because I saw it on CNN. More white individuals are shot and killed by police nationally than blacks. So that's the only data that I have on that topic. So I would say that it's the same issue. Confrontation begets confrontation.
From Ms. George Johnson, who is a member, culture is evaporating in a negative manner rapidly, because parents in certain areas express a profound need for a leader who looks like them. Do you feel, as the former unfairly ousted chief, this does not benefit them or any parent in a culture of gun violence?
So I actually do have some very strong opinions about this. In New York City, when we had the Abner Louima scandal, anybody here remember that? That's when some officers assaulted a Haitian immigrant in the 70th precinct in Flatbush, Brooklyn. Howard Safir was the police commissioner at the time, and he didn't send an African American to that precinct to try and heal the wounds. He sent me. And, you know, I'm not accustomed. I got to tell you something. Growing up in a pretty multicultural environment in the Bronx, I used to speak Spanish fluently. I didn't experience how bad racism could be until I actually went to Newark. And then when I got here and I looked at the history of Chicago, how it was built this way on purpose, and all of these things that have happened, that's when it really came clear to me. But again, recognizing where we came from, to me, that's the first solution. And nobody's talking about that. And what is it that we could do to build a plan to grow out of it? I don't think that I have to look like you, Pastor, to police in your community. My wife will tell you I'm probably too sensitive, right? But I'm sensitive to what goes on, and different cultures have different hurdles that they've overcome too. Even the Irish.
Susan McKenna asks, how do you build morale of officers when they are reasonably more fearful for their lives?
Well, in my case, I would say personal leadership. Some of the best conversations that I had with police officers during my tenure here in Chicago would happen at 1 o'clock in the morning on street corners in places like Englewood or West Garfield Park. Being out with them, doing the things that they do, and leading them and showing them how to do it is one of the greatest satisfying experiences that I've ever had in my life. And now more than ever, we need that. But, you know, there's an understandable fear that these officers have, not just for their lives, because, you know, a more ineffective policing agency becomes more dangerous for everybody, not just for the civilians. You know, the police have the obligation to go out and do it. And sometimes it's difficult, but I fall back on personal leadership.
Stephen Shucker asked, if you could spend one full calendar year in Rahm Emanuel's shoes as mayor of Chicago, what would be your largest singular focus?
I don't know if I even want to answer that question. I am not an elected official. I'm not a politician. I have no desire to do that. You look at the fiscal crisis that the city has, the pension issue, the teachers, the schools, the crime, you know, it's a handful. He's got a very, very, very difficult job. Eddie Johnson has the second most difficult job in this country, in my book. But, you know, when you're faced with so many challenges at once, and I've been in these situations before, you got to sit down, you got to construct a plan, and there's no quick fixes for these things. It's not about, there's no fairy dust out there. And again, we're looking for a panacea right now to fix police-community relations. You can't fix something that hasn't existed before, and there's no quick fix for it. So what I would do is peel back the onion and bite off chunks, step at a time.
Unless we have other questions, this is the last one. Do we have more coming? Okay. Okay. The last question. Ruby S., who is a member, can you speak to how much Rahm Emanuel knew about the Laquan McDonald situation when it disappeared? Was there a cover-up?
No, I can't talk. Look, I've said this publicly a number of times. The mayor was not in control of what was happening with that video. The Corporation Council was defending the policies at the time. Like I said earlier, if I was asked, I would have recommended not releasing that video, if I was asked. Now, the Corporation Council was fighting the lawsuit to release it, and that is the policy that was in place at the time. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. The mayor was not in charge of the Cook County State's Attorney's Office to determine when or if the officer was going to be charged. So, you know, conspiracy theories can be fun, right? JFK, Lincoln, Warren Commission, you name it. But that's simply not the case here. The mayor did not have the capacity to prevent that video from going out.
Thank you. Pastor Harris, thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Tony Pawlowski, Executive Director for the Arc of Illinois. We fight for the rights and needs for 220,000 infants, children, and adults with intellectual and other developmental disabilities and their families. With a bit of support, people with developmental disabilities can live a full life in the community. This is accomplished in a variety of ways, such as being included in their neighborhood schools alongside their non-disabled friends, being supported to live in their own homes instead of being locked away in institutions. Diversity makes our community better. And the good news, doing the right thing, investing in community supports, also saves taxpayers money. In fact, it costs taxpayers about half as much to support people with disabilities in community homes where they're better cared for than it costs to have them housed in institutions. Advancing positive public policy by supporting the development of community services best serves the needs of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. This is our greatest goal, developing inclusive communities so everyone can live a full life in the community. That's why I'm so proud to serve on the Illinois Channel's Advisory Council. At its core, politics is about people and their needs, and the Illinois Channel's coverage of our issues allow us to tell the story of people with disabilities and their families, not in a quick soundbite, but in full, unedited interview in which our parents can tell their story, what they want for their child with a disability, and why they were concerned about what the state was doing. Isn't that the kind of coverage we all want of politics? Coverage that ties us to the issues that really matter and in a way that doesn't shortchange the ability of those impacted to get their message out. I'm Tony Pawlowski, Executive Director of the Arc of Illinois and a proud member of the Illinois Channel's Advisory Council. The Illinois Channel, it keeps us connected to the issues that matter the most.
Next from Springfield, former judge and former colonel in the Illinois National Guard Ronald Spears speaks at a dinner hosted by the Profession of Leadership Foundation, honoring their military and first responder colleagues. This runs about 30 minutes.
Well, Illinois has a long and distinguished record of lawyers serving in the armed forces and also in the emergency services, fire, police, emergency medical folks. You know, it went back, for example, to Abraham Lincoln, who served in the Illinois militia. He was in New Salem at the time, and he joined the militia in the Black Hawk Indian War. And one of the greatest days of his life, he said, was when he was elected captain over in Beardstown of his militia unit. Now, he only served for a couple of months total, and he did joke about it later that he had numerous bloody encounters with mosquitoes, but he always cherished his time because of the leadership that he was able to gain by leading those people during that period. He also met John Todd Stewart, who was in his battalion. John Todd Stewart became a friend of his in the legislature in Vandalia, and he encouraged Lincoln that he had the ability to be a lawyer. He loaned him his law books, and he was his first law partner in Springfield. So there was some connection even then of Lincoln and how he became a lawyer. Being a lawyer in many different ways in the services is an important thing. I would say to you that an example is my father-in-law was a combat veteran in World War II. Through the Pacific, you know, one combat mission after another. My granddaughter, Meredith, saw his old uniforms and saw that his branch insignia for the infantry were crossed rifles. She saw that Grandpa Ronnie's branch insignia for the Judge Advocate General Corps was a sword, a gold sword, crossed by a quill pin. And so she asked me what I did, and she was a little worried because she'd seen this like a war movie on TV and was kind of nervous about guns and so forth. I said, well, Papa Don protected America by using a rifle. And Grandpa Ronnie protected America by using a pen and a book. And she thought that was really good. She was relieved, and maybe if she saw me shoot, she'd be even more relieved. So we've served in a number of different ways. What I didn't tell Meredith, though, is that in today's world, no matter what you do in the military, you're at risk, whether you have a position that's in support or whether you have a position that's in combat. And the story that it brings to mind is by one of the people on your list tonight, but he's not here. In 2004, my JAGs were starting to be deployed overseas. Joe went overseas. Just about all the JAGs went overseas to either Iraq or to Iran. And it was really kind of a scary time, and they would only take people of certain rank. And so it got down to the point where we were going to have to send a major for a deployment. And so I volunteered that I would go. I was a full colonel at the time. I knew there'd have to be a waiver through the Pentagon and so forth. And so it came back that the waiver was not granted. They couldn't send somebody of my rank to go for this assignment. They were going to send a major. So they sent John Childress. John is a lawyer from Springfield who was with the U.S. Attorney's Office at the time. Had two lovely young boys and a wife, and how crushing it was to watch all of my JAGs be deployed and the stress on their families and so forth. And it was about a one-year assignment. And about halfway through that assignment, I got word that John had been on a convoy on a mission in Iraq, and a roadside bomb had exploded, overturning the vehicle that he was in, causing him some serious injuries. And he was later lauded because his first attention was to get support in and to make sure that there wasn't any other aggressive attack at the time and to make sure his people were protected. But he suffered some serious injuries, for which John was awarded not only a Purple Heart, but a Bronze Star. When John came back to town, he was an associate judge for a while. He's back with the U.S. Attorney's Office, which has always been his love. But as I reflected on it, I was thinking, you know, John was a lot younger, a lot stronger, a lot more physically fit than I was at the time of that duty. And if I had been in that vehicle, that might have been the last chapter. You might have been hearing Joe tonight here. But that's the way it is, the randomness of the military. And you never know what exactly is going to happen, when it's going to happen, what assignments you're going to have that could really bring it to a close. So Patriots Day was September 11th. I don't know if you knew that Congress had designated September 11th every year as Patriots Day. Patriot is probably one of the most misunderstood term that there is. If you think back of the time of the Revolution, what a patriot was, we usually think of now as a loyalist, somebody that's, you know, all the government, you know, anything the government wants to do, but that's not a patriot. A patriot is one that holds the government accountable, that if there's a wrong, they want it to be corrected, and they will resist if there's wrongdoing. So what we need today, it seems to me, to honor, not just to say thank you. That's the thing that you hear. That's what these service members hear. Thank you for your service. And so what I want to talk about just a little bit tonight is how maybe we need to go a little beyond that and what I call thinking patriotism. Not just the rah-rah, waving the red, white, and blue, and that's important. That's what everyone needs. But what they also need is a deeper understanding of the military service in our country, of what it consists of, what it needs, what we can do as lawyers, as communicators to the public about those needs. Because if you look at the numbers, it's hard to get a head count. If you want to go out today and say, how many are in the military? Well, let's say somewhere around 2 million. That's the active and reserve component. How many firefighters? Well, maybe there's 1 million or so firefighters of active and volunteers. How many police? How many sworn officers? Well, maybe 900,000, and then do we include other correctional officers? Do we include others? How many EMTs? Maybe 250,000. If you throw in 130,000 licensed attorneys as defenders of freedom as well, and I think we're all defenders of freedom, you still won't have 2% of the population. So the issue becomes, how does the 2% of the population get the understanding and the support and the care and the proper concern of the 98%? Now, we know, those of us in here that are a little older, know how fast public opinion can swing on these things. We can remember soldiers getting spit on in airports during Vietnam. And we can remember after 9/11, and since that time, that they're treated properly as heroes. And that we've finally disconnected in our head the people that give the orders for them to go and where they have to go and what they have to do when they get there. The same with police officers. Were treated differently after the Chicago Democratic Convention than they were treated after 9/11. We know how fast the mood can swing on those sort of things. So how can we properly get them to understand? And when I mean understand things, we've had a volunteer army for the last 40 years. Every year we have to recruit 17 to 24-year-olds. We have to get about 150,000 of them. Did you know that about 75% of the people in that age group, 17 to 24, are not qualified to enter the military through a combination of factors that include they don't have a high school degree or a GED, or they can't pass the admission test, the ASVAB, which is the admission test to the military, or they have a serious criminal record, either misdemeanor or felony criminal record that's disqualifying, or they have physical problems or obese and they can't meet any kind of fitness standards to be able to enter the military. So that gets us down to 25%. We are now in a technological fight for our lives in terms of military. It's about who can leverage technology to gain an advantage on the battlefield, where you're going to be competing for the greatest minds. If you want something that's kind of scary, go on ESPN and watch the National Drone Competition. Anybody seen this? This is unbelievable. They have these young people. They're doing drones, and they're in all sorts of trick competitions, and the way that they can work with these drones is unbelievable. So just for a moment, imagine that you put a camera or a weapon on that drone. And imagine the many issues that are going to come up, legal issues, protection issues, all the other kind of issues that we're going to be dealing with. My point is, we're going to need the best and the brightest of our young people to help fight that fight. And the sad reality is that of the 25% that are qualified, after 15 years of war, most parents are somewhat hesitant to want to encourage their child to be in. But it isn't just somebody else's job to do. That's part of the message and part of the problem and concern. The other thing is that we have to make a national security issue out of good education for our young people, making sure that they get some guidance so that we can reduce some of this criminal record, encourage fitness and nutrition. Those are national security issues for all of our young people. The second thing that I'd say about the military that I want people to understand is how in the battle for civil rights, every discriminated group has fought to get in the fight. Because if you think about it, people have recognized that if someone is willing to fight and die for me, they should have full and complete citizenship, full and complete rights. So if you look, in fact, get back to my guy, Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln probably died because of that issue. Because in the last speech that he gave, which was just a few days before his death from the second floor of the White House, the speech that he gave said that during Reconstruction, one of the things that we need to do is to consider suffrage for the African American soldiers that had fought. Booth was there and was quoted as having said, he's for blank suffrage. That's the last speech he's going to give. I'm going to run him through. And that was the night that the kidnapping of the president turned to the assassination attempt on the President of the United States. But since that time, look at what has happened. And I'm happy to say, as part of the Army, that all of those barriers have finally been breached. It's been a long, hard struggle. It was not an easy struggle. But women, if you want to be combat soldiers, I have a recruiter out in the hallway. Good news. And we've broken down the barriers of race, of sex, and of sexual orientation. So the military is now open for all, and we welcome and need the support of all. Some things that I want to consider as lawyers that can help is the last thought of a police officer or of a soldier or someone in the military I don't want to be is, I wonder what the lawyers will think of this. And that is happening on the battlefield, and it's happening in our police departments. And what do I mean by that? I mean that those are two areas where deadly force is authorized and where split-second decisions have to be made. I was talking with one of the security officers here tonight, and I said, you know what I wanted to do? I don't own weapons myself, but my father-in-law just passed away a few months ago, and he had all kinds of weapons, a World War II combat veteran. One of the weapons that he had was a pellet gun that he used on the farm to get the critters out of the garden, and that pellet gun looked exactly like an Army 45. Same weight, metal. You could not tell unless you were in bright light very close to it and saw the bore was smaller because it fired a pellet rather than a bullet. And so what I was planning on doing, and some of you know my devilish side knows that I really wanted to do this, I was going to bring it and I was going to have it here under the thing, and then I was just going to hold it up. Okay? Now, that was going to accomplish several things. A couple of them good, a couple of them not so good. A couple of good things it would have accomplished is it would have forced you in that rapid cognition mode. In rapid cognition, these are the decisions that we have to make in just a matter of a few seconds, 2 or 3 seconds. What the research is showing us now is that this isn't done consciously. It's done all through our subconscious. It's the result of all the experiences that we've had. And if you have grandchildren or if you still have young children, you've played the matching game. And so what's going on in our brain is an instantaneous matching game, where what we're seeing is being matched with all the things that we've ever experienced in our life, all of our attitudes, beliefs, and all that thing, and then an impulse is coming out through our brain that we react upon. We call it intuition, we call it whatever, but it isn't a conscious, deliberative decision on, well, gee, I wonder what I wonder. And when I say I don't want them having their last thought being, what will the lawyers think, is that all of these acts are micromanaged after the fact. I mean, something that happened in 2 seconds results in years worth of study. I don't know how many lawyers would be involved in all of these things. It's even shown in the movies sometimes. If you watched American Sniper, if you watch the very opening scene of American Sniper, he's on the roof, he's got his spotter, he's looking out and he sees a young child approaching the American troops. And he sees a handoff between the young child and the child's mother, and he thinks it was a bomb, but he's not sure. And so his buddy's asking him, you know, are you cleared to shoot? Are you cleared to shoot? And he makes some comment, kind of like, you know, I'm going to have to make the call, and the JAGs are going to have to figure it out. Okay? Because these guys are getting court-martialed if they're wrong. If somebody up there had a video camera and wants to take the picture and put it on Al Jazeera, the next week they may be before a board trying to decide if they had just cause to use deadly force in a military combat situation. Now bring that forward to the police officer on the street and the decisions they have to make. Now, understand that there are no excuses to be made. I've been in several of these professions. We have bad lawyers. that need to be out of our profession. And we see every couple of months our Supreme Court has to put some of them out of our profession. But the sad thing is they've caused a lot of harm. You look at the number of the program that have to compensate, the lawyers' compensation program that goes along with ARDC as to how much money they pay out every year, how much harm is done to people before we finally get them out. And that's the same in all these professions. But what I want you to do is to be a thinking patriot. And maybe one way of being a thinking patriot is to look at some of the research that's coming out on this rapid cognition. Malcolm Gladwell wrote a book called Blink that I recommend to you. What he's talking about are these 2-second decisions that you have to make, and what everything happens through your cognition that would lead you to be able to make a decision. Some of it good, some of it bad. He calls it thin slicing. As that matching game is through your brain, it only has 2 seconds, so it's not really able to fix on all those things. So it takes a thin slice off of all those experiences and pieces it together in your brain to make a decision. And if I'd pulled that gun up, you would have done something. And what you would have done would be based on all of your experiences in life. Some of you would have ducked down under the table. Some of you would have thought, oh, it's just Spears, you know, I'm surprised you didn't bring a cannon. Some of you would have done, you know, other things, but you would have done something. You would have thought something right at that moment that would reveal a lot about you. My father-in-law used to say in combat, you never know how you're going to react until the first shot is fired. That some of the people that came in and thought they were Rambo were curled up on the ground in the foxhole when the first shot ran out, and others that seemed rather meek were able to perform admirably under fire. Read Dan Simon's book, The Invisible Gorilla. Most of you have seen that video, and I'm going to tell you about it, but it's not going to give it away because he's done a lot of others that even if you look at it now, you won't get it. So what it is, it's a video. You can go online and read and do it. It'd be fun. You ought to look at it tonight when you get home. And so what it is he says, okay, there's going to be 2 teams. There's going to be a team in white shirts and black shirts. And they're going to be throwing basketballs back and forth to each other, to their own team. And you're to count how many times the white team exchanged the basketball. And at the end, I'm going to quiz you, and it's very important that you pay close attention to this. And so they do, and so you watch, and then at the end he says, well, how many times did the white team change the basketball? And most people say, well, you know, this number. And he says, yeah, that's good. And he goes, oh, that's very good. How many of you saw the gorilla? And at least 50% of the people go, what? And he shows it back in slow motion, and the gorilla walks across, all the way across, stops, beats his chest, and then proceeds on across the stage. Okay? Now, I'm not just talking about 50% of lay people. I'm talking about 50% of the judges in new judges school. Okay? And what Simmons, his research is about is when we fix on one object, we don't see many other objects. And we don't see the same things. We're not seeing the same thing as we're sitting here tonight. Different things are entering our mind, different recollections, different memories. He was also on this team that wrote a very excellent report on eyewitness identification, that as lawyers that are going to be ever having witnesses on the stand, or as judges who are ever going to be trying to evaluate witnesses, should read the entire report. It's on his website on eyewitness identification. And the third thing is the studies that are going on about implicit bias. The American Bar Association, the Illinois State Bar Association are focusing on this idea of implicit bias. There's a website that Harvard has called Project Implicit. You can go on there tonight and you can take your own quiz on all these different areas, from sex to gender to weight to age, and you'll think you're a pretty good person going in, and you may not even invite yourself to dinner after you're done with the survey. Because we got baggage. One of the things that I did as part of the Army is they sent me to the Defense Equal Opportunity Management Institute. It was a 3-week program in Florida. It's one of the leading programs in the country on what we were going through at the time concerning race relations and other issues in the Army. And so I went in there thinking, you know, I've got this stuff pretty well figured out, and, you know, I've mastered the art of political correctness and all this stuff. And after about the first 3 days, you realize you're pretty bad inside. I mean, you got tapes and stuff running in there, experiences running in the deep background. This is stuff running on the computer that you're not really bringing up. It's just there. And so a lot of studies are going on now, and there's questions of overt racism by our police or our military, or whether it's this implicit kind of thing that's going on deeply underneath that we all have to worry about, that we have to worry about as judges, that we have to worry about as lawyers, that we have to worry about as police officers, that we have to worry about in the military. So all of these things are going on that we want you to be aware of. As I look through the list of people that had served here, you understand this is just scratching the surface of the lawyers from this community that have served in many different capacities. A few years ago, we requested judges that had served in the military to make themselves known to us, and we had this huge poster made, of judges who had served in the military, and it's just amazing. And as you get the word out, you would have hundreds and thousands of lawyers that have served and served proudly. So I guess to kind of summarize it is, to say thank you is going to be more than just waving a flag on the 4th of July or on September 11th and saying thank you for your service. It's trying to understand what these people have really gone through. So for the last couple of minutes, I just want to talk to you a little bit about that. I had to deal with families that had lost service members. I had to deal with them as they were leaving, the tearful goodbyes, the trying to get ready, all of the problems that they were enduring, and then I had to deal with families that loved one was gone, that was experiencing every kind of problem you can imagine, and then I had to deal with the families of soldiers that were killed, and there were several Guard soldiers that were killed in either Iraq or Afghanistan. These are horrible things, but it's not just the ones that are dead. We have had over 8,000 soldiers killed in Iraq and Afghanistan just since 2001. But more than that, we've had tens of thousands seriously wounded, amputations, every kind of horrible injury you can imagine. But the depression, the suicide rate, the other problems that these soldiers are experiencing because of the constant deployments that they're undergoing. When you only have a limited number of people and you're at war for 15 years, you're starting to have cycles of deployment one after the other. The family just gets a person back and gets them in some side of normalcy, and then they're keyed up for deployment again. And of course, the escape through drugs and alcohol, all of the other post-traumatic stress syndrome, traumatic brain injury. I mean, I can't overstate the seriousness of it for how many of the large percentage of these people that come back. So it's important that we have things like veterans courts. Veterans Court, you have a brochure on in your information. It's one of our specialty courts in Illinois. It's a very important program that we have. I was proud that at Christian County, where I'm from, has, as you notice, all of the courts up and running. Judge Paisley's doing an excellent job down there. But these veterans need to have a chance of keeping their record clean so that they can get employment. They need to have an opportunity to have their medical, physical, psychological issues dealt with. These are strict programs. These are not giveaway kind of programs that you're being easy on people to go into. They're very serious programs. And I'm happy to say the Veterans Administration, while they're dysfunctional in a lot of areas, have been pretty functional in the areas of helping our veterans courts to really function and to help these service members. I also, after 9/11, the Illinois State Bar Association Military Affairs Committee got a list of volunteers, of lawyers who are willing to help families, to help veterans, to help their families of veterans that are away, to help service members. And we got a huge response. And so that project is still ongoing. It's gone away from some of the deployment issues. Now our primary issues are reemployment issues, employment issues, family law issues. So we still need volunteers to help in that area. You might have noticed there was a small filing fee add-on for helping to develop a project for a statewide call-in service for veterans that are in need of legal services and their families that could be able to access legal help, pro bono legal help, low-cost legal help. So I hope that you'll consider serving in some capacity in those things. Well, I could talk about veterans and service members, law enforcement for a long time. There's that 3% that's there in the middle of the night that we don't want to think about needing, but there are service people tonight in over 100 countries that are on post. Some are going to be injured tonight. Some are going to be lonely tonight. Somebody's family is going to be hurting tonight. And to be able to sit here in a great country like this, and to be able to know that they're there and that they're there when we call, is really an important thing that I hope that we all reflect a little bit tonight on that and what we can do by way of appreciation. Closing, several years ago, Justice Fitzgerald apparently was working at some kind of place for homeless people, soup kitchen, and he was really touched because he learned that some of the people there were veterans that had served in the war. And it just really got to him. And so he decided that he needed to do something about it. And so he rallied the troops, if you remember, and we got volunteer lawyers from all over the state to represent veterans in their claims before the Veterans Administration. Our Veterans Administration in Illinois had a deplorable record at that time. It was justice delayed and or denied. And so we had training, we had programs, we had lawyers that were eager and ready and willing to help, like we usually are when the Supreme Court calls. But it was wonderful to see. It was a blessing to see. And to paraphrase what Justice Fitzgerald said that was very meaningful to me, was the last paragraph of Lincoln's second inaugural address. And I want you to go home and read it because it's as vivid today as it was when Lincoln gave it. You know, after 4 years of Civil War, we've had 15 years of war. We pick up the paper today and we still see terrorist attacks. We see evil in all of its forms, you know, all around us. And we see suffering veterans, suffering police officers and families and so forth through all of these situations. And so, to paraphrase the last paragraph, it said we need to bind up our wounds as a nation. We need to care for those that have served and for the survivors of those that have died. We need to, as a country, come together again in a way that glorifies the death and the sacrifice that all these people make every day. So, you know, that's my request here tonight, that we as lawyers spend our time as communicators in our community, informing people about the needs of the 2%. We personally take on the responsibility of doing what we can for that 2%. We promote things that are going to help our young people so that they can be prepared for life, have a good education, good nutrition, good fitness. Some of them be able to serve if called upon in one of these professions. And that we be appreciative, not only of all the people that we've honored here tonight, but all the people that have ever served. Thank you.
You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois.
Hi, I'm Matt Hart, Executive Director of the Illinois Trucking Association. For over 80 years, we've represented the interests of those who work in the Illinois trucking industry. We work with members of the legislature to pass laws to help make the roads safer, to help keep Illinois trucking competitive, and to help provide ongoing educational opportunities for those in our industry. The technology of trucking is forever changing. So too are the laws regulating the trucking industry. That's why the Illinois Trucking Association is proud to support the work of the Illinois Channel, which keeps citizens around Illinois connected to what's happening in state government and what changes are being discussed that will impact their families, their communities, their future. And the Illinois Channel gives those of us in industry an opportunity to share our thoughts on public policy with our fellow citizens across Illinois. I'm Matt Hart, Executive Director of the Illinois Trucking Association. I'm also proud to serve on the Illinois Channel's Advisory Council on Transportation. The Illinois Channel, it works for all of us.
Next, we speak with Dave Treader of the Federation of Independent Illinois Colleges and Universities about the impact of private higher education in Illinois and the need to keep private education affordable through such programs as the Monetary Award Program. Dave Treader, thanks for joining us again on the Illinois Channel. As we are here at the 19th of September, the governor and the legislature have done a stopgap funding bill that takes funding for most of government through the more or less the end of the year, which means higher education has had a rope thrown to them of sorts, but they're not out of the woods, and a lot of people have focused on the impact of this budget standoff on public education. They may not realize the impact also on those schools that are privately funded because of various programs like the MAP grants for students in private schools. But when you deal with your members from around the state, what are you hearing as far as the impact of the budget on them?
Well, certainly, remember that the two stopgaps that were put in place for higher education funded operations of the publics, and importantly, the Monetary Award Program for the private colleges and universities. By the way, MAP is available for students that go to public, private, community colleges. So the real impact here is that we went largely a year without any predictable funding. And if you know anything about college, parents, students, they need a game plan for how they're going to get through college, where they're going to go. So we have some funding for 16 that's gone out after the fact, but we hit the reset button after June, and we're back in the same position we were a year ago with that same unpredictability, stability in the system. So a lot of us are worried in higher education, both public and private, about the long-term effect and the short-term effect. For instance, are these students, first, are they going to be able to go to college? And two, are other states more attractive now, given all the uncertainty kind of baked into the system here?
You know, we talk about independent colleges and universities, and I think for years, and I would say as someone who was raised outside the state of Illinois, but Illinois had a great reputation for colleges and universities outside the state. And we would look at places like a Northwestern University, as well as the University of Illinois, which is a public school, obviously. How many of the private schools, colleges, and universities are there around the state of Illinois?
Well, there's 60 in my association, another 30 smaller, so close to 100. And that's important, and I don't think well understood, unfortunately, maybe not well enough understood in the General Assembly. As you go around the state, you mentioned Northwestern, if you look in Chicago, Loyola, Columbia, DePaul, but around the state, if you travel to central Illinois, Illinois Wesleyan, if you go over to Quincy University, and all of those small liberal arts colleges in Galesburg and Monmouth, together now all those institutions educate more students than the public universities. So it's a great option for the citizens that are looking for a college that's the best fit. Also, it's a really good deal for the state because these schools, really the only money they get from the state is on the backs of low-income students who are looking to go to college. So it's a win-win. Illinois residents have really a plethora of choices wherever they want to go to higher education, whether it's community college, public or private. And the budget impasse that's been continuing is really putting a lot of that in peril, in question, as to our ability to continue that.
First of all, I wasn't aware that there were more students going to private schools than public schools in Illinois. I think a lot of people would be surprised to hear that. The other thing I would bring up, and it's somewhat of a hidden economy, if people go to, I went to Mizzou, well, it stands out, that big university in that small town, as does the University of Illinois in Urbana. But when you have the schools like Loyola, I had a son go to Loyola, because it is part and parcel of that metropolis of Chicago, it doesn't stand out, and yet the millions of dollars that school has going through it as an economic engine is similarly employing people and putting money into that local economy, just as a Mizzou does in Columbia or a University of Illinois does in Champaign-Urbana, right?
Well, exactly, and I think a lot of times we focus on the large institutions that are in large urban areas, but your point's especially acute in a small community like Jacksonville. You have two colleges, Illinois College and McMurray. If you take those colleges out of that town, it's a fundamentally different place. In fact, Most of the citizens have some connection to the colleges. The same for Knox College in Galesburg. They're anchor employers, cultural centers, a lot of stuff going on campus, a vibrancy given the youth that's on those campuses. So really, as you look across the state, it really is a huge benefit, both locally and in the economy. Good jobs, people that work there, and we're kind of putting all that at risk.
Yeah, you know, on that cultural point, especially in some of these smaller communities, you don't have the wealth, as in Chicago, there's such a wealth of cultural things, the museums and all that one can go to. In some of these smaller communities, you look at Eureka College, where Ronald Reagan went to. You have speakers coming in, of world-class speakers. Mikhail Gorbachev came to Eureka College a few years ago and spoke. And so these colleges and universities are really a hub for not just educating the students, but to where there are these events, the speakers, that the people locally can come in and attend an event that otherwise wouldn't be available of that quality in those smaller communities.
Well, it's exactly true. And those kind of examples, like you just gave at Eureka, are true across the board if you look at what Bradley does in Peoria. And it's one of the curious things that I think has developed over the last couple of years is there's been a disinvestment, if you will, in higher education. And I like to make the point that if we had private businesses that were leaving the state or going out of business, that our leaders would bend over backwards to save 100 jobs, 1,000 jobs. And yet here we have really a gem in a lot of ways. Good for the state, good for the citizens that go to school there. By the way, when the students walk out, they're going to have a better life. They're going to pay more taxes. They're going to rely less on social services. All the things that we know that a higher education provides, we're putting that all at risk. And, you know, we worry that we ought to be protecting the investment here, not just defunding it and letting it wither on the vine.
Yeah, and not to focus both on public and private for a moment. Both of these, all of these schools, and again, you have the small schools like a Benedictine here in Springfield, McMurray and in Jacksonville, as you mentioned, but you have the major schools, world-renowned, like Northwestern, like the Loyolas, and they're bringing in, similarly, students from around the world. So they're bringing into the Illinois economy millions of dollars, number one, and number two, when we have our businesses, and we have some of the biggest corporations in America, and you mentioned Peoria with Bradley, people also don't realize the nexus between some of these major corporations and the universities. When a company wants a study done, they want to find out, hey, we're thinking of doing something. What would the impact be? And they don't want to go out and find that out by spending millions of dollars doing something wrong. So they'll give a grant to one of the universities to conduct a study in that field so that they can save millions of dollars and launch a whole new initiative, or understand that maybe it's not going to work. But I think people don't realize that our universities are also plugged into the economy in ways that are not obvious. You know, it's beyond just the students attending the schools.
Well, one very direct connection to business is, you know, you'll hear really on a weekly basis, business say, hey, we can't find trained workers. We can't find educated employment force. We'd love to hire people here. Well, sitting in our backyard here, public and private, are some of the finest colleges and universities in the country. So there needs to be a recognition that as goes higher ed, I think often as goes the state. And by the way, if we're looking to attract new businesses to Illinois, they're going to be looking for a workforce that's educated or has the option to get more educated. So again, a lot of dovetail effects. If we do a good job in higher education, you know, economic impact improves, we're more attractive to businesses, all the good things that happened. And so, you know, higher education really needs to be put back on the map and be a higher priority.
And then just to close out, as I say, the other thing I think about both having large schools, sometimes we may diminish inadvertently in our mind a smaller school, but not everyone wants to go to a University of Illinois. Some people feel lost in a school with 30,000 students, and they don't necessarily are interested in the big football team and that kind of thing. A lot of people are, some people aren't. Some people want to go to a school that has a religious background, like a Loyola or a Benedictine. So You really need that diversity to match the diversity, I think, of the student population, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly true. We talk a lot in higher education about fit. What's the best fit for the institution? And there certainly are students who would go onto a campus of 30,000 students and be overwhelmed. But they might go onto a campus of 1,000 students and think, this is right for me, smaller classes, more of a personalized. And in Illinois, you can do that cost effectively. These colleges are affordable. And one of the main reasons they're affordable are programs like the Monetary Award Program, which, by the way, remember, that's a program that just is based on need. So it's only the neediest students. So we're really setting up a system here where those students who are going to go to school anyway are going to go. Really what we're targeting is the most vulnerable students in these cutbacks and limiting their options. And I think we're finding many of them look at the package of available resources and just decide, we can't do it. And we just can't let that happen. I mean, these are the students that need college the most.
Let's just close out as we stand here in September. The legislature's not in session, of course. It'll be coming back for in November for the veto session, and then we'll go back into the spring session after the holidays. When you're representing your members, what do you do in these months when the legislature is out? Well, how do you, aside from talking to the media as you are right now, how do you get your message out, and to what interaction are you having either with the administration and or the lawmakers on an ongoing basis?
Well, right. When the legislature and governor are not in Springfield, we're spending a lot of time doing just good old advocacy. Traveling the state, for me, it's meeting with rank and file legislators across the state, making the case that we need investment in higher education. And without that, we're really putting our P20 pipeline, K through 20 pipeline, in jeopardy. And so a lot of it's just like what we're talking about here, op-eds in the paper, motivating folks on our campuses to continue to beat the drum that we need to invest in higher education.
Do you have a target dollar amount that you're advocating for the funding of these, like the MAP grants, or how much money are we talking about?
Well, yeah, certainly. You have to be realistic given the economic condition of the state. This is a program that you could fund at $1 billion and we still wouldn't serve all the students that need help. Right now it's around $370 million. I think our goal would be certainly to protect flat funding at a minimum. And as times improve, build on that and put more money in. There's certainly a lot of need there. And it's shown to be a cost-effective state program. So somewhere around 370, certainly more would be good. But again, you have to be realistic about the conditions here.
Dave Trotter, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.